Perspective of renewable energy developers. For this, we have three very esteemed panelists, Mr. Ranjit Gupta from Ocior Energy, Mr. Sinha from Greenko, and I'm afraid there's a slight change in the agenda. Mr. Kashyap, who from ACME Group, who was here since morning, unfortunately had to go for some work emergency. So he has deputed Mr. Shiromani Kant, who is joining in another 5 minutes. I would request the other two panelists to please join us on the stage, and I will till then introduce the panelists and then we can move to the discussion. I'll first introduce Mr. Ranjit Gupta, who is founder and CEO at Ocior Energy. He started his career at Schlumberger, working in Japan, India, Syria, Jordan, the US, and Indonesia. In the past, he served as CEO at Ocior Power. He co-founded Ocior Energy in 2014 and Orange Renewables in 2011. He's also developed, constructed, and operated over 5,000 megawatt of renewable energy projects. He was the founding CEO of India Bulls Power in 2007 and led the development of 5,000 megawatt of thermal power projects. Mr. Arnava is Vice President Sales and Commercial Green Hydrogen at Greenko. He has been heading the sales and commercial function of the new energy business of the group and is responsible for commercial strategy, planning and development of the green hydrogen, green molecules business. He has close to 2 decades of experience in leadership positions across India, the Middle East and the US in various functions, including sales and commercial, strategy, operations, planning and HR. Prior to joining Greenko, he served as sales and commercial manager at Schlumberger, India, responsible for designing and implementing the strategic vision towards business growth and sustainability. He's a mechanical engineer from BITS Pilani and has an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. Mr. Shiromani Kant, who will be joining us shortly, is General Manager, Business Development and Green Ammonia Sales at ACME Group. His areas of experience include business development, product demonstration, supply chain, rural marketing, channel management, key account management, CRM operations, techno-commercial functions, resource deployment, and administration. While we are waiting for Mr. Kant to join, we can begin with the other two panelists. I'll start with Mr. Gupta first. Mr. Gupta, we can start with 2-minute remarks on what your company does in this space and overall renewable space, and the same question for you, Mr. Sinha, and then we'll move to questions like challenges, etc. So I would request you not to speak about them yet. We'll come to those questions later.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about Ocior. So Ocior Energy, which I co-founded with Murli Subramanian and Michael Naylor, was founded last year with the objective of setting up, developing, and constructing and operating green hydrogen, green ammonia projects in India and the MENA region. The reason for choosing India and MENA region is, of course, because India by itself is a very large market for green hydrogen. So it would make sense for us to develop projects in India. And the reason why we chose the MENA market was because the initial development on green ammonia and green hydrogen is coming from EU. It's driven by the EU largely. And for supply to the EU, the MENA region, which is Middle East, North Africa, makes more sense. So we are developing a couple of projects in the MENA region. We signed a project in Egypt, which we are working on. And in India, we are looking at doing projects in Orissa, in Andhra Pradesh, and in Gujarat. So, we are very excited with the opportunity. Like, every day we hear a new deployment of green hydrogen and green ammonia. Just like Ms. Africa mentioned that 10 million tons per annum by 2030 is what EU is expecting to import, which is a really, really large opportunity for companies like us. So very excited to be here, very excited to be part of this business.
Mr. Sinha, your...
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Kushbu. So thank you for having me here. So I'm representing Greenko. We are traditionally what you would call an IPP, a renewable power producer. Greenko as a group has got about 7.3 gigawatt capacity of installed renewable assets in the country, spread across about 16 or 17 states. Probably one of the few companies or few organizations that has got a very equitable share of solar, wind, and hydro assets across the country. Now, over the last 4 or 5 years, the group has invested quite significantly in developing or creating a solution for the intermittency problem of RE. So we have invested in that aspect, and we have got some pumped hydro storage solution projects that are coming up. And in the next 4 or 5 years, we expect to have got about 100 gigawatt hour of storage capacity built through our pump storage projects, which we also believe would be the lowest cost green electrons that you can have available round the clock. So the concept of RE-RTC, that's where we have invested over the last 5 years or so. Now, of course, once you have the ability of round-the-clock RE power, what do you do with that power? Of course, you can sell the electrons, which is what we are also doing, but at the same time, you also want to invest in going toward the green molecules segment. And that's where I come in. I look after the business development and commercial of the green molecules side of the business. Our plan immediately is to get started with certain medium and large green ammonia plants. Our plan is actually to have more than 3 million tons of green ammonia production in the next 5 years or so. And we are in the process of partnering with one of the giant oil and gas companies in India, ONGC, and we are looking at exploring possibilities of how we can make that happen, to have a 1 million ton green ammonia project set up. Apart from that, we are also participating in certain green hydrogen tenders and projects that are coming up. Of course, not too many of them have been awarded yet, but we do expect that ecosystem to also develop soon. So we're looking excitedly toward that as well. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Kant, while we were waiting for you, we introduced you already, and thank you for coming here on such short notice. They've already presented remarks on what their companies are doing in the green hydrogen, green ammonia space. So maybe you'd like to share just 2-minute remarks on giving a brief.
Thank you for having me here, and first of all, apologies for being late. Was stuck in the traffic. I represent a company called ACME Cleantech, and ACME Cleantech though was established way back in 2003, but the real story of its journey in the solar business and allied started in 2010 when it ventured into the solar business space. And since then, there's no looking back. In 2018, the company hit the grid parity pricing, first time ever in the country, of 2.44 rupees per unit. And that was the point in time when the company started thinking of forward integrating or adopting the policy of Strategy X. And then it was thought, why don't we forward integrate and get into the business of green hydrogen and green ammonia manufacturing. But then that point in time, the concept itself was in a very nascent stage, and there was no reference point as such. So the company proceeded and commissioned the world's first integrated green hydrogen, green ammonia plant in Bikaner, Rajasthan, with a small throughput capacity of 5 TPD of green ammonia production. But the agenda was not to commercialize it. It was basically a commercial pilot project. We are running this commission plant from 2021 November, and at various operational level. The agenda is to derive the maximum learning from it and incorporate these learnings in our upcoming larger scale plant in Oman, which will be commissioned in 2 phases. In the first phase, it will be 300 TPD of ammonia per day, and then subsequently, it will be scaled up to 3,300 TPD of green ammonia production. So likewise, in India also, we have proceeded and we have received an MOU. We have gone ahead and done an MOU with several state governments, like state of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Orissa, Rajasthan, etc., to establish a similar scale of plant in India as well. So 1.2 million metric ton of green ammonia production capacity is what we are looking forward to establish. And together, the company has an aspiration to scale up the production capacity to reach a target of 10 million metric ton of green ammonia production by 2030. So this is in brief about our company.
Mr. Shiromani, a follow-up question. Why Oman, or like what were the major drivers for choosing Oman as a destination for such a big project?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for this question. In fact, we know that the raw materials for the green ammonia or the green anything renewable, so the raw material is the renewable energy. And if you say the renewable energy, the basic element is to have a good solar radiations in place. So world over, if you see, by and large, the solar radiations availability would be available in areas like in Australia, in Chile, and in Middle East. And when we talk about Middle East, Oman is one place where the GHI, the global horizontal irradiation, is on a higher level. And that makes the per unit cost of production of solar energy less and viable for the project. So this was one of the critical elements for us. Not only this, and apart from this, the requirement of land for these kind of large-scale solar projects is huge. And we are fortunate, and the Omani government also supported in providing the land space. Just to give you a perspective, for the generation of 1 megawatt of solar energy, around 4 acres of land is required. And if you are talking about a gigawatt scale and that level of scale, then imagine the kind of land which is required. So for the first phase, we have already acquired 92 square kilometer of land in Oman, and subsequently in India also, we are planning and we are trying to. But then the biggest challenge in India is the non-availability of land in one place. So it will be somewhere here, scattered, sporadic, here and there. So that's the greatest challenge. In Oman, this was something which was there available.
I'll now move to Mr. Gupta. Mr. Gupta, what are some of the projects that the company has planned in India? I believe there were announcements of some projects in Odisha and Gujarat. What is the status and what are your plans there?
So the first two projects that we are looking at are in Odisha and in Gujarat in India. And the Odisha government has been very helpful in furthering the cause of green hydrogen. They've come out with a very good green hydrogen policy. Gujarat government is working on one, and we expect the Gujarat government policy also to come out soon. The process of feasibility reports, etc., is going on, and post that, once the policy is clear, that's when the production, the development can pick up speed there.
Right. And who do you expect to be the first off-takers, or which industries are expected to be the first off-takers for green ammonia that you produce in these states?
Right, so that is then we start talking about challenges. So I think one of the biggest challenges that faces the industry today is the offtake. And, I guess ACME and Greenko are the leaders in this, in the sense that they are at the forefront of trying to close contracts. Mm-hmm. And I feel that, hopefully over the next maybe 6 months, a year and a half, the structure of these contracts will be better known as to how these contracts will be structured. Because unfortunately, there is a difference between how traditionally oil and gas companies work versus how renewable energy companies work. In case of renewable energy companies, all the capex goes in on day one, and therefore whatever comes out has a fixed cost in a way, right? The cost of operation is very low. And therefore, when you produce green hydrogen or green ammonia from a renewable energy project, you expect to have a steady cost of green hydrogen and green ammonia, which is not buffeted by what OPEC does or what happens with the temperatures or what happens with climate. Very little correlation. And on the other side, the oil and gas business is very, very dynamic, right? I mean, the prices change on a day-to-day basis. Geopolitics comes into play, and OPEC and all the other factors come into play. And therefore, the buyers of green hydrogen and green ammonia, or the buyers of hydrogen and ammonia so far, are used to having floating price linked to market. So they will see prices as low as $250 per ton for ammonia, and they'll see prices as high as $1,500, $2,000 per ton, and they are okay with it. But they are not okay with having a 700 or 800 dollars per ton ammonia price fixed over a period of time. So I think there is some jostling going on, and we hope that that certain frameworks will emerge, which will help in closing contracts. There is a lot of interest. Like when we talk to off-takers, everybody wants to get into contracts. Everybody is seeing a need for contracts. The frameworks are yet to be finalized.
Right. Mr. Sinha, there are so many projects that have already been announced by Greenko in this space. Can you shed some light on the projects that are already in advanced phases of construction, for instance, like the Himachal project or some other project?
Yeah, that's actually the first one, the Himachal project. It's not in an advanced stage of construction. We are in the process of awarding the licensor plus EPC tender, RFP. Some of them are here. I won't name them, but the participants of we've got a very good participation from licensors and EPC companies for that tender, and we are finalizing the award process. So one particular question that generally I get asked is why Himachal? Because when we talk about green ammonia, the general tendency is that we try to stay as close to the port as possible where there are already existing infrastructure, which can then be leveraged, especially if you are looking at an international offtake. We chose Himachal for a different reason, which I think Shiromani had earlier alluded to, which is the availability and cost of power. Himachal Pradesh is a green grid, and that's something that's extremely important when it comes to the product itself, right? The green ammonia, that's the label that we're going to have to achieve. And having that green grid was the main reason why we decided that, yes, the first plant, 100,000 ton per annum capacity, should happen in Himachal, even if it is a little far from the coast. Two things. One, we do realize there is a latent domestic merchant demand in the north and west of the country, which can still be catered to from Himachal. And the second thing is the pace at which the project can be developed. We're looking at developing this or getting the project commissioned sometime in 2024. And at that point of time, there will not be too many other green ammonia plants anywhere globally. So that gave us an advantage in terms of, even looking at an international export, even if it is 1,000 kilometers away from the coast. But that's the first project, and as I said, we're looking at commissioning it by sometime next year. The second project is in Kakinada. It's also a green ammonia project for 1 million ton capacity, and we're looking at having that plant commissioned in end of 2025. The third one is, and that would probably come in two phases of 500,000 ton train each. The third plant is being planned in Tamil Nadu, in Tuticorin. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, we are looking at the joint venture possibility with ONGC for a further 1 million ton plant. Now, of course, one important characteristic or important parameter in being able to execute any of these projects is the ability to get the raw material secured. And when it comes to green ammonia, really the raw materials are what goes in the production of green hydrogen, which is A, renewable power, and B, electrolyzer. So through our pumped hydro storage projects, the first of which is getting commissioned by end of this year in Andhra Pradesh, we do have the round-the-clock or RERTC capability. And for electrolyzers, we have formed a joint venture with John Cockerell of Belgium. They're the largest alkaline electrolyzer manufacturer in the world. In fact, in terms of delivered market share last year, they had about more than 30% market share globally. So the idea is that we're setting up a plant in India. It's a 2 gigawatt capacity plant. Again, will be done in two phases of 1 gigawatt each. So this will then secure mainly, aimed at securing our supply chain of electrolyzers.
Right. And what technology is?
Alkaline.
Alkaline. All right. Okay. Mr. Gupta, my next question for you is that you did speak a little bit about the challenge related to offtake. Can we now move to other challenges that you foresee in developing this green hydrogen ecosystem from a developer point of view?
I think the challenges with green hydrogen, green ammonia lie at two different levels, right? One is at the level of the project itself, which is the project development part of it, and it was alluded to by Shiromani about where the land is going to happen and so on and so forth. And then there is the other challenge, which is related to the bankability of the project. And when you talk about the bankability of the project, the first thing that one needs to worry about is the offtake, right? And offtake is, I think, the biggest challenge at the moment. Apart from the offtake, there are, I feel, two other challenges which exist. One is, this rush towards market distortion being, introduced by the Inflation Reduction Act or, the European Hydrogen Bank, where, they give subsidies which are unreasonable and distort the market. And that will have a very long-term impact on how the market develops across the world. It will, we have seen this in India all the time, that when the subsidy is distortive, it doesn't help the industry. And I feel that, that is one challenge that developers outside of EU and outside of the US will face, because there'll be uncertainty as to how the IRA and whatever subsidies that the EU is talking about for their domestic production, how will those play out with respect to what is going to happen in the rest of the world. The third challenge which we face, which is also on a larger, broader scale, is the definitions. Right? How is green hydrogen going to be defined? How is green ammonia going to be defined? Are you going to be allowed to produce power and bank it? Is it going to be temporal correlation? When will temporal correlation kick in? Will it be 26? Will it be 29? Will it be 35? Those kind of certification. And because when you're doing a project, like I said, that a lot of the capex goes up upfront. So these kind of changes to what is allowed as far as correlation of green power to the production of green hydrogen, green ammonia is concerned, those kind of parameters are many times baked into the design of the project. So if there is uncertainty as to what will happen on the various certification issues, then there is a possibility of there being a problem, a challenge as we go forward and put the capex in. And any of these these uncertainties, whether the uncertainties are related to offtake, whether the uncertainties are related to certification or the subsidies, will play into your debt, because debt providers will want certainty on these matters, right, before they can go out and provide debt to these projects. Each of these projects, even at a small scale, right, if you do a 500,000 ton is maybe $2.5 billion, so therefore you're looking at a $1.5 billion debt portion of those projects. And with these challenges which could impact the profitability of the project going forward, these challenges become very, very important to address right up front when you're planning these projects.
Right. Mr. Sinha, same question for you, but if you could also throw light on some of the challenges like those related to water or storage or transport, all of these issues as well.
No, I think those are definitely very practical and at-your-face challenges right now, right? Because if we are looking at water, if we can use fresh water, great, but the amount of water that will be required, can that be sustainable over a 20, 25-year time horizon? And if multiple such plants come up, what will then happen? Then really the only recourse then becomes to go to or go through a desalination plant. That will have its own challenges, of course. But that's still probably something that has to be done in the interest of moving forward at this time, and that's how we are looking at as well. But beyond that, if we are looking at green hydrogen as the final product that you'd have to sell to an off-taker, I don't think that ecosystem is ready yet, except, and Dr. Mehrotra was here, so he mentioned about transmitting it through pipeline. That's probably the only feasible way today, and how much of it is feasible also is something that is still under discussion and deliberation. So then, I guess at this point of time, the important thing is that the hydrogen has to be carried through a vector, and green ammonia can be that vector, looking like, increasingly like it is going to be that way for a certain number of years to come. But that introduces another challenge to the equation, which is if green ammonia is only a vector or only a carrier of green hydrogen for a few years and not beyond, and after which green hydrogen storage and transport becomes easy, what happens to the green ammonia plants? And that's, I think, a question that I don't have a ready answer for it, except to say that green ammonia at this time is looking like the solution. And going forward, it will stay that way for some time. Eventually, yes, given that green hydrogen is increasingly being looked at as the fuel of choice, or that's where we are trying to transition to as far as the primary mix of fuel is concerned. That could throw some interesting questions in the coming years. But that's probably for another day to discuss.
Okay. Mr. Kant, since ACME has an operational project in Bikaner on green ammonia, maybe you can shed some light on the learnings or the initial experiences from that project, and what can be done to avoid some similar mistakes or learnings in other projects.
Some of the critical learnings, as I said, that we are trying to operate it at various levels, so that we derive a optimum resource and optimum variables at which the larger scale plants can be run. One of the biggest challenge is that the solar power generation itself is very intermittent, and how do we run it uniformly? So that's something which our engineers are trying to understand and trying to incorporate those learnings in our future plans. So I think this is one part, and the second part is that we are, though the banking facilities are available, but then we are not using it, and we're trying to operate as a standalone plant. Because in a large-scale plant like that, what we are developing in Oman, it's a off-grid project. It's not connected with the grid, and everything has to be done as a renewable energy. It has to be generated as a renewable energy and operated in that fashion. So that first thing, the certification will get easier, and the second, that it will be completely 100% green. So without any support of grid. So these are some of the learnings which we are trying to derive out of our existing commission plan.
Do you want any other challenges that?
See, apart from the challenges which my co-panelists have mentioned, I think the other biggest challenge is that the renewable energy or the power sector actually is a concurrent subject, and which essentially means that it's governed both by the central government as well as the state government. And though there is little clarity on the state or the central level, but then if you go at the state-wise level, the charges differs, and if the charges differs, then the cost of green power also differs, and that actually makes a huge difference if we consider the project feasibility into consideration. So I think, because see, we have considered that for the production of green ammonia or green hydrogen, the major chunk, or maybe to the extent of 60-65% of the total cost, can be attributed to the green power. And if green power itself is higher because of these policies and state government policy or central government policy, then the final cost production of green hydrogen or green ammonia becomes higher. So that's some of the challenges. It has to be normalized, standardized across.
Right. Mr. Gupta, any thoughts on the present viability of green ammonia or green hydrogen projects, or the cost economics part of it?
So,
we're talking a lot about it, but cost is the ultimate.
Well, viability is, difficult to define. When, for example, like in India, the experience, right, when we started the solar business, right, tariffs were 18 rupees or 19 rupees. Right. So when you say, was solar business viable at that time, for a company, for an IPP, if you had a power purchase agreement at 18 rupees, it was viable. For a state government where they were probably buying power at 5 rupees or 6 rupees, a solar project at 18 rupees or 19 rupees was not viable. So it depends on whose perspective you are looking at. So I think as far as companies like ours are concerned, perhaps $800 if you can get ammonia, a pricing of around $800, $850, $750, depending upon exactly where you're producing it, FOB. It might be viable. for a refinery or for a fertilizer company which is used to buying ammonia at $300 or $250 or $350, it might not be viable.
But that again takes us back to the challenge of offtake.
Yes, that takes it back. The thing is that I think, and like EU has done very well, and is that the country, just like India decided about hydrogen, about solar, the same way EU has decided, for example, or Japan has decided, or the US has decided that they want to go the green route. When you decide that, and you take a view that a parity will be achieved in X period of time, it's not something that is not going to be achieved for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years. We strongly believe that parity on the green hydrogen and gray hydrogen, or green ammonia and gray ammonia, will probably be achieved over the next 6-7 years, and some people are more optimistic than even that number. So if you believe that over the next 6 or 7 years, or 8 years, or 9 years, parity will be achieved, and the first significant projects will only come up 2 years, 3 years from now, that means there'll be a period of 4 or 5 years where your projects will, perhaps from the perspective of the buyer, will not be viable. But if you're looking at, like for example, if you look at EU uses 6-7 million tons of hydrogen, right, currently, or maybe 10 million tons. And their plan is to import 10 million and produce 10 million, so 20 million tons by 2030. So EU is seeing a huge increase in their consumption of hydrogen and ammonia compared to what they were doing today, simply because of the fact that a lot of the stuff that they're doing with fossil fuels will be converted to green hydrogen and green ammonia. So if you look at it from that perspective, perhaps 5%, 6%, 7% of the world's needs will be met by the time that parity happens. And if you are producing 5 million tons or 10 million tons of hydrogen at slightly elevated cost, and the next 80 million, 100 million, or 200 million tons is produced at a cost which is comparable, then really it is viable. It is not something which is unviable. If you look at the solar projects, after the first 15,000 megawatts of solar projects, the projects have achieved a price which is lower than the grid price of right. So since 2016, 2017, we have been at grid parity. So the initial investment in solar was very low, and overall the pricing impact of that power to the common consumer would be in 1 or 2 paisa over 500 paisa, 600 paisa that we are paying for units of electricity. So therefore, really, I feel that just like EU has done, just like the US has done, just like some other countries have done, they have done the right thing, and I believe that there is going to be viability to these projects.
Right. Mrs. Sinha, if you would like to add anything to that, and then probably shed some light on what sort of policy drivers are you expecting in the next phase of the policy or in the mission that has been announced?
That's where I was coming to, actually. That's what I would like to add. And see, one thing is, the government of India has done a fantastic work in terms of developing that standard in India, right? So we know MNRE has already circulated a draft of green hydrogen standard, where they have also included green ammonia definition, which the rest of the world is still kind of waking up to today, right? So I think that's where a standardized definition, and Miss Africa, she told it, she put it very succinctly, right? There are 4 challenges out there. First of them is actually about market development, which Ranjit mentioned so well. Second one is actually about coming up with a standard definition of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, right? And that's what we look forward to from the government. Third is skills development. We are blessed to have a great population of process engineers in the country, and believe me, it will go a long way in establishing that market in India, the ecosystem in India. But more needs to be done, because there are specialized talents or specialized skill sets will be required, and that's one area where we definitely have to go toward. And final, of course, manufacturing, right? And again, there the policy that is that we hope will come out very soon the incentives, they would have to be geared toward, facilitating a manufacturing capability in a country. End of the day, though, this is from the supply side, right? There has to be a demand push, and that is what is going to create production capacity in the country. And there's a danger in being too fixated with exports only, because when we are trying to export a product, we are basically competing with the rest of the world. Many times we'll win, many times we'll lose in terms of the pricing, the commercials of a project. So the industry or the ecosystem of building up a green hydrogen or a green ammonia ecosystem in the country will only happen if we have a thriving domestic demand. And that's, I think, what is the need of the hour. We use about 6 million tons of hydrogen in the refineries. How much of it we would need to convert? I think that's a question that I would throw to the downstream oil and gas companies, right? How much of it would they want to be converted? And probably government can and will push them as well to get that done. The fertilizer, we import more than 3 million tons of ammonia to the country. How much of it can be replaced and at a cost that can be absorbed by the country? Yeah. Right. Those are the questions that need to be answered. City gas distribution, another area, which, and all of this will facilitate, moving toward the green hydrogen economy.
Right. Mr. Kant, your thoughts on key policy drivers required?
Actually, most of the points have been covered, but then I think, as rightly pointed out, that this development of the complete ecosystem will be driven by the demand. So there has to be a demand which should actually pull the development of this ecosystem, and this demand can be developed only when there is a proper mandate in place. In terms of government asking, the companies or the sectors to gradually transit themselves from the utilization of current grey ammonia, green hydrogen to the greener part of it. That is one. And the second is if we talk about the mandate can only come if it is backed up by some kind of VGF, viability gap funding. We talked about the differential pricing which the green and the grey currently is having. So this gap needs to be bridged, and that can only be done through a mechanism which the government will be enforcing or will be coming up with. That is the second. And I think the third part is also to do research in other allied disciplines. Like what we are targeting is that there are a few specific sectors. Like there are sectors like fertilizer sector, which consumes most of the imported grey ammonia. So in the Indian context, somewhere close to around 2.5 million tons of grey ammonia is imported, which goes specifically for the production of complex fertilizers. That is one. The second sector is maybe the hard to abate sectors like the steel, the cement sectors, the refinery sectors and all. But then I believe that there are some other sectors also, allied sectors, in which the researches can happen and should be undertaken. I'll give you an example. In US, the fertilizer, the urea fertilizer, the nitrogenous fertilizer, which is applied is to the extent of 21 million tons. And out of this 21 million tons, 1/3 of it is applied as anhydrous ammonia, direct in the field level, anhydrous ammonia. So I think if it happens there in US, so can it happen in India. Yes, agreed, the systems, the conditions are different, both in terms of the climatic and it is much hotter. The land sizes are the lower line sizes are here. 1.1 hectare is the average land size land holding sizes here in India. So that may be a challenge. But then the point which I'm trying to make, if it can happen there, it can happen here as well. The same thing was told once the agenda to introduce the combined harvesters for harvesting practices was being thought of maybe a couple of decades ago. The same kind of the issues were emerging, but then at least we found a challenge. We surmounted the challenge, and now if you see in the regions like Punjab and Haryana, combined harvesters are being used predominantly for harvesting purpose. So I think the research in the anhydrous application of ammonia or the usage of ammonia as a fertilizer can definitely be done. That is one. It will not only increase the market potential for the anhydrous ammonia in the country, maybe in anhydrous form or maybe in aqueous form also, because that aqueous form also can be utilized as a fertilizer. But it will also save exchequer, much hard exchequer from the government, because it's a subsidized material. It's a subsidized, urea is subsidized. And if we can, supplement or supplant some portion of urea with products like anhydrous green ammonia, then I think the government will also end up in getting advantage to it. So I think these are some of the opinions.
Right. Mr. Gupta, would you like to add anything to that? Some policy drivers that are required in your view?
I think on the policy driver, one thing which India could do is that whenever they do, and I'm assuming that that will happen, is that when India comes out with a mandate to buy green hydrogen or green ammonia, it will hopefully be a dollar pricing, right? Because if you can get dollar pricing, then you can get dollar debt, and that will drive the cost of hydrogen and ammonia down compared to if you do domestic debt. And we have been talking about doing a dollar pricing for power for a very long time, which perhaps doesn't make sense, and it gives government a problem on the foreign currency. But when it comes to green hydrogen, green ammonia, anyway natural gas, large part of it is imported. So therefore, and it's in dollars. So therefore, if hydrogen also can be procured by the Indian refineries or Indian fertilizer companies in dollar terms, it'll help in driving the price down.
Okay. We'll take some questions from the audience now. I'll begin from the right. If there are any questions, yes, please. So requesting everyone to please keep their questions short and limit them to maximum 2 so that we have time for more questions.
I have a question with Mr. Gupta. So at this level, what are the international codes and the standards which are being followed in India for green hydrogen production and distribution, and how are they being adopted to local conditions? Are there any other things in that?
I don't know about the adoption to local conditions, but so this is a challenge, because because there's no standard worldwide code at the moment. So therefore, if you are building a plant for Europe, then that plant will hopefully work for Japan also, or if you're doing a plant for Japan, it will hopefully work for Europe also. So that is a bit of a concern. You might end up doing a higher spec plant, which makes it uncompetitive for a company or for a country that requires lower spec hydrogen or ammonia. So largely what people are doing, what I understand is that people are looking at projects which are in India to supply to either India or to South Asian, East Asian markets, and therefore following the standards which will apply in India or apply in Japan or apply in Singapore. Whereas if you're building a project in the MENA region, you could potentially be looking at EU as your primary market, and therefore you have to build your projects as per the EU guidelines.
Right.
Okay, another question I have related with, how are the stakeholders right now in this green hydrogen industry working with regulatory bodies for industry specific standards and codes? Are there any?
There is a lot of work going on with MNRE, and MNRE is the nodal agency, and MNRE talks to the Ministry of Chemicals, Fertilizers, PNG. So, MNRE has traditionally, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy in India has been traditionally very, very open with their processes, and they give full access to industry to come and talk to them, give representations, submit reports, submit analysis, which helps them in policy development. So that process is ongoing, and touch wood, MNRE has been very good with these processes.
Right. We'll take a question from the middle row.